Something just happened to Voyager 2 that should make every space fan sit up straight. Subscribe, because this story starts as a routine whisper from deep space and ends with the most uncomfortable truth about how fragile our reach really is. Voyager 2 is more than a spacecraft. It is a time capsule, a messenger, and a very old machine still talking to us from farther away than most people can picture. And the part that hits hardest is not science fiction. It is real mission reality. Voyager 2 launched in 1977, built for a mission that was never supposed to last this long. The plan was bold but simple. Use a rare lineup of planets to do a grand tour. One spacecraft, a few years of work, a handful of close flybys, and then retirement. Instead, Voyager 2 kept going, decade after decade, past the bright, familiar planets, past the place where sunlight still feels like home, past the edge of the solar wind. And in November 2018, NASA confirmed Voyager 2 crossed the heliopause, the boundary where the sun's influence drops and interstellar space begins. That alone is historic. Only 2 human-made objects have done it. But here is where the story gets tense, in a very modern way. People imagine deep space as quiet and empty, like a dark room with no sound. The truth is uglier and more interesting. Deep space is filled with particles, magnetic fields, shock waves, and plasma. It is not a clean vacuum with nothing happening. It is a place where small forces add up over time and where tiny mistakes become giant problems. And Voyager 2 is old. Not old like a used phone. Old like a 70-year-old car still driving across a desert with a fading fuel tank, cracked wiring, and a radio that only works when the wind is just right. Its power comes from a radioisotope source that slowly weakens year by year. So engineers have been doing something that feels cruel but smart. Turning off instruments to save energy. Stretching the mission like you stretch the last drops from a bottle. NASA has been openly shutting down instruments on Voyager 2 to keep it alive longer. That detail matters because it sets the stage for what people on the outside often misunderstand. When Voyager 2 goes quiet, it is usually not because it met something magical. It is usually because physics is brutal and the margin for error is tiny. Here is the most important thing to understand about Voyager 2 communication. It is not texting. It is not even a phone call. It is basically trying to hear a single, faint whistle from a pin drop on the other side of the ocean during a storm. Voyager 2 talks to Earth through the NASA Deep Space Network. Giant antennas that listen for a signal so weak it can be drowned out by the universe itself. And even then, the signal takes hours to get here because Voyager 2 is billions of miles away. News reports have described Voyager 2 as over 13 billion miles from Earth in recent years. So when something looks strange in the data, your first suspect is not aliens. Your first suspect is distance, noise, radiation, and aging hardware. Now let's rewind for a second, because you cannot feel the stakes of this without remembering what Voyager 2 has done. Voyager 2 is the only spacecraft that has visited Uranus and Neptune up close. That is not a small flex. That is a permanent place in history. It flew past Jupiter and Saturn too. And across those flybys, the Voyager program helped reveal new moons, strange rings, and wild weather. When people say the golden age of planetary exploration, Voyager is one of the reasons we can even say that with a straight face. And while Voyager 2 was doing all that, NASA, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and partners like Caltech were basically writing the playbook for deep space navigation. This is the same system of careful tracking and radio science that the Deep Space Network depends on today. So now picture this. A machine built in the 1970s is still sending knowledge back from interstellar space. That knowledge includes plasma measurements, magnetic field readings, and cosmic ray data. These are not pretty photos anymore. This is the cold, raw science of what exists beyond the bubble of the Sunday. And when Voyager 2 crossed the heliopause, scientists did not just cheer. They leaned in because it was giving direct measurements of a place we had never measured from inside before. NASA's own announcement highlighted evidence from multiple instruments, including the plasma science experiment, the magnetometer, and particle detectors, supporting that boundary crossing. Now, here comes the part where your summary needs a hard correction. There has been a lot of internet drama claiming Voyager 2 sent an unexplained signal, reoriented itself without command in a mysterious way, and stopped sending science as if it encountered something intelligent. That story makes a great horror thumbnail, but it is not the confirmed story. What is confirmed is still gripping, and it is actually more useful because it is real. In July 2023, Voyager 2 went silent because a wrong command caused its antenna to point slightly away from Earth. NASA and JPL publicly explained the issue. The spacecraft was fine, but the signal missed us. Then, on August 4, it began returning science and telemetry again, meaning it was operating normally and still on course. That single event should terrify you in the right way, not because of aliens, because it shows how thin the thread is. A tiny pointing error and the voice is gone. And this is why the Deep Space Network feels like a character in the story, not just a tool. Without those antennas, Voyager 2 is a silent piece of metal drifting in darkness. With those antennas, it becomes a living conversation with the edge of our solar system. Now let's talk about the interstellar space environment itself, because this is where the real mystery lives. When Voyager 1 crossed into interstellar space in 2012, it reported a confusing magnetic environment near the boundary. Voyager 2 crossed in a different place and at a different time, and the measurements help show the boundary is not a simple, smooth wall. It is more like a messy shoreline where winds meet currents. That is part of why scientists care about having two Voyagers, two paths, two sets of conditions, two chances to test what we thought we knew. Voyager 2's plasma measurements were especially valuable because its plasma instrument was still functioning in the way Voyager 1's was not. That made Voyager 2 a special witness at the heliopause. So what did it find? It found that interstellar space has a measurable plasma density. It found changes in particle populations. It found magnetic field behavior that helped refine how we model the heliosphere, the bubble carved by the sun, into the local interstellar medium. And here's where people get tempted to go off the rails. Because when science says, we found something unexpected, the internet hears, we found something impossible. Unexpected does not mean supernatural. Unexpected means your model is incomplete, and nature is reminding you who is boss. Now let's make this relatable, because deep space physics can sound like boring soup if you do not connect it to something human. Imagine you are listening to a friend talk from the other side of a stadium during a football match, while someone is shaking the speakers. You might hear a word wrong. You might hear a weird pattern. You might think your friend said something spooky, but the signal is just fighting noise. That is Voyager. Cosmic rays and charged particles can flip bits in electronics. Temperature cycles can stress components. Hardware can drift. And because the signal is so weak, even a small glitch can look like a coded message if you really want it to. And yes, the Voyager spacecraft can do some automatic behaviors. It can protect itself, manage power, and maintain pointing. That is not mysterious. That is how deep spacecraft survive. When it does something on its own, it is usually because its fault protection logic is doing its job. Now, here's the part that lets you keep the mystery vibe without lying to your viewers. There are still real questions in Voyager 2 data that are genuinely eerie in a scientific way. What is the structure of the magnetic field out there? How smooth is the flow of interstellar plasma? How does the heliosphere interact with the local interstellar medium over time? Why do the two Voyagers sometimes report different patterns? Those are clean mysteries, real mysteries, the kind that keep scientists at places like the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics busy, because the answers help us understand how our solar system sits inside the galaxy. And if you want a chill that is still grounded, here it is. Voyager 2 is sending us direct measurements from a place no human has ever been, and likely no human will visit for a long time. So when the data looks strange, it might not be a thing at all. It might be a new kind of environment behavior we have never sampled. That is the real unknown cosmic entity in this story, not a creature, an environment, a physics regime a space weather system bigger than our instincts. Now let's talk about the so-called final transmission idea, but in a way that does not scam your viewers. Voyager 2 is not dead. It is still communicating, but it is slowly being stripped down. Instrument by instrument, it is becoming quieter on purpose so it can survive longer. NASA has described shutting off instruments to extend the mission, leaving a smaller set of tools running. In March 2025, NASA explained Voyager 2 would continue operating its magnetic field and plasma wave instruments for the foreseeable future, while other instruments have scheduled shutoffs to conserve power. So the fear is not that Voyager 2 met something. The fear is that the universe is doing what it always does. It is taking time away, 1 watt at a time, 1 instrument at a time, 1 whisper at a time. And that fear is real because it forces you to face a hard truth about exploration. We can build messengers, but we cannot keep them alive forever. Now, here is the moment that hits like a punch if you narrate it the right way. Think about the golden record. It is not magic. It is not a beacon. It is not a GPS pin for aliens. It is a human gesture, a small, beautiful, slightly desperate gesture that says, if anyone ever finds this, here is proof we existed and we tried to be more than our problems. So when people say, what if something noticed it? That is a story device. It is not a confirmed event, but it is a powerful way to express the feeling we all have when we picture that spacecraft alone in the dark. We want the universe to answer back, and the universe is mostly quiet. That is what we all feared. Not that aliens are watching, that the dark might actually be dark. So let's build the climax like a news report, but with clean honesty. In mission control terms, the scariest thing is not a monster. The scariest thing is a structured, corrupted signal because it forces engineers to ask, is this noise or is this failure? And we have already seen how a single command mistake can point the antenna away and make the spacecraft vanish from our ears for days. That happened. JPL said so. So imagine the moment the Deep Space Network locks onto Voyager 2 again after silence. That first faint carrier signal is like hearing a heartbeat through a wall. It does not tell you the whole story. It only tells you the patient is still there. Then the real work begins. Decoding, checking telemetry, confirming attitude, confirming power, confirming temperature, confirming that science instruments are still responding. And then comes the brutal truth. Even if the spacecraft is fine, the mission will still slowly shrink because the power is fading and NASA is already making hard choices to keep it going. So what does Voyager 2's final transmission confirm in a way that is both scary and real? It confirms 3 things. First, the edge of our solar system is not the end of anything. It is the start of a different environment, and we are still learning its rules. Second, our connection to deep space is unbelievably fragile. The link can break from small errors, tiny misalignments, and simple physics. Third, the mission is living on borrowed time, not because of a conspiracy, but because the power source declines. And the only way to keep Voyager 2 talking is to turn parts of it off, one by one. And if you want the emotional truth behind all that, here it is in plain street language. We built a messenger that can leave home, but we did not build an immortal messenger. So every faint signal we receive now is not just data. It is a final chapter being written in slow motion. Now let's bring this home without ruining the mood. Voyager 2 is not a horror story. It is a survival story. A tiny machine built when computers were weak and screens were thick is still doing science in interstellar space. It has outlived careers, outlived presidents, outlived whole eras of tech. It has become proof that humans can reach beyond their own lifetime. And that is the part that should make you pause. Because while Voyager 2 is still whispering, it is teaching us what the universe is really like when the sun is no longer the main character. Cold, structured, physical, fast, not evil, just indifferent. And that indifference is the thing that scares people once they grow up a little. Not because it means we are doomed, because it means nobody is going to do the hard work for us. If we want to understand the cosmos, we have to earn it. If we want to survive long enough to explore it, we have to earn it. If we want to make sure the human story continues beyond one planet, we have to earn it. Voyager 2 does not confirm aliens. It confirms something harder, that the universe is big enough to ignore you. And the only way to matter in it is to keep learning, keep building, and keep pushing. Good. Let's keep it moving. Clean and grounded. So here's what I want you to picture. Voyager 2 is out there, in a place where the sun is no longer the boss. And from Earth, we're not watching it like a live camera. We're listening for a faint tone, then trying to rebuild meaning from that tone. That tone is called a carrier signal. Think of it like a steady whistle. If the whistle is there, the spacecraft is alive and aimed close enough that we can hear it. If the whistle disappears, the first question isn't what did it meet? The first question is, did it turn its antenna? Did it lose power? Did it go into protective mode? Or did Earth just lose the lock? Because Voyager 2 doesn't have the luxury of mistakes. The biggest lie movies tell about space is that space is dramatic in a loud way. Space is dramatic in a quiet way. Most disasters are silent. Most failures are slow. And most weirdness is a tiny thing that snowballs. Now let's talk about what it means when a spacecraft acts on its own. Because people love that phrase. Voyager 2 has automatic safety behaviors. It has rules like, if something looks wrong, protect the spacecraft first. That could mean switching to a backup system, turning off a power-hungry instrument, or pointing the antenna to a safe direction so it can talk again. That's not the spacecraft becoming conscious. It's the spacecraft doing what it was built to do: survive. But here's the unsettling part. From Earth, those safety moves can look like intention because you don't see the cause. You only see the result. You only see it changed mode. It stopped sending science. It started sending only basic health. It went quieter. And that's exactly how deep space mysteries are born. Now, what is health telemetry in real terms? It's the spacecraft saying, my power level is this, my temperature is this, my attitude system is this, my computer is responsive, my transmitter is functioning. It's the heartbeat and breathing of the machine. It tells you it's alive, but not what it's seeing. Scientific data is different. Scientific data is the eyes and ears. That's the magnetometer, plasma wave instrument, particle detectors. That's the part that tells you what space feels like where it is. So if a spacecraft goes into a mode where it sends mostly health, but stops sending rich science, you can imagine why people start sweating. Because the spacecraft might be fine, but the story might be dying. Now, let's make the distance hit emotionally, because distance is the real villain here. Voyager 2 is so far away that even a simple instruction becomes a slow motion action. You send a command. It takes hours to reach it. Then it takes hours for the response to reach you. So you are never fixing things in real time. You're playing chess through the mail. That's why mission teams at places like NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory are careful to the point of being paranoid. They don't get to click undo. And the scariest part is that deep space doesn't care if you're careful. You can do everything right and still lose contact because of a random cosmic ray flipping a bit, a component aging, or the power dropping just enough that a system becomes unstable. People underestimate how much the universe tries to kill electronics. Charged particles hit the spacecraft, radiation passes through. Over years, tiny damage accumulates. It's like leaving a radio outside in harsh weather for decades and expecting it to sound perfect. It won't. So when you hear stories about strange signals, the first honest layer is always this. Signal corruption can happen without any outside intelligence. But here's the second layer. And this is where it stays mysterious in a scientific way. Even if the signal is corrupted, it can still be structured. Meaning you might see repeating patterns, certain frequency bumps, certain timing oddities. Not because aliens are typing, but because the spacecraft systems operate in cycles. Its instruments sample at intervals. Its transmitter has rhythms. Its antennas and oscillators can drift in ways that create patterns. So the job becomes separating three things: noise from space, noise from the spacecraft, and real data about the environment. That is hard. Now, let's talk about what Voyager 2 is actually measuring out there, because this is where the real tension is. Not the conspiracy tension, the physics tension. Beyond the heliopause, you're in the local interstellar medium. That's a polite name for the stuff between stars. It's not nothing, it's gas, dust, magnetic fields, and energetic particles. The density is low, but over huge distances, it matters. Voyager 2 has instruments that can sense plasma waves, magnetic field strength and direction, and particle populations. And here's what makes that creepy in a calm way. You cannot see magnetic fields with your eyes. You only infer them through behavior, through how charged particles move, through how instruments react. So when the magnetic field looks too smooth or too stable for what your model expects, it doesn't mean you found a wall or a ship. It means your model is missing something. And the best part of this story is that the two Voyagers can disagree. People don't realize that's a gift. Because if you only had one spacecraft, you could blame everything on a fluke. With two, you can compare. You can say, do we see the same pattern or a different one? Do we see similar boundary behavior or not? Is the heliopause the same everywhere, or does it change like weather? That's the kind of question that keeps space physicists glued to screens, because the heliosphere is the protective bubble that shields us from a lot of cosmic radiation. Understanding it is not just curiosity. It's part of understanding how safe or unsafe space travel really is. Now, let's talk about the hum idea in a way that doesn't lie. Space isn't silent. Not to instruments. Plasma can oscillate. Waves can travel. Shock fronts can pass. A plasma wave instrument can pick up signatures that feel like tones or hiss or bursts, depending on what's happening. These can come from solar events traveling outward, or from interactions at the boundary, or from the interstellar medium itself. And sometimes, the weirdest part is not a violent spike. It's persistence. It's something that just keeps showing up in the same general way, like an itch you can't scratch. That's when scientists get uneasy, because persistent signals demand an explanation. Now, here's where your story can stay intense without going fake. Because even if we never mention aliens, there is still a very uncomfortable truth. Voyager 2 is in a place where we do not have a lot of direct measurements. We mostly have models and indirect evidence. So when Voyager 2 shows something odd, it becomes a rare witness. It becomes a single microphone in a giant stadium. And when the microphone crackles, you don't know if the stadium changed or the microphone is dying. That is the core tension. Now, let's tighten the emotional screws a bit with something real and simple. Voyager 2 is running out of power. Not suddenly, slowly. Like a candle burning down. And every time engineers decide to turn off an instrument to save power, they're making a trade. Keep the spacecraft alive longer, but hear less. It's like keeping a person alive longer, but slowly losing their senses, one by one. It's a horrible comparison, but it makes the point. Voyager 2 is not just traveling farther, it is fading. So when you hear final transmission, don't picture one dramatic last sentence. Picture a long goodbye, a slow quieting, a great explorer turning into a faint heartbeat, then eventually silence. And here's what makes that feel personal. Voyager 2 is one of the most human things humans have ever done. It's not just engineering. It's a decision to reach into darkness with a message, even though you don't know if anyone will ever answer. That golden record is not a beacon that screams. It's a bottle thrown into an ocean. And people joke about it, but deep down, it's heavy. Because it's honest. It says, we were here, we tried, we wanted to be known. Now, about the more controversial speculation, you mentioned alien tech, surveillance devices, passive probes. I'm gonna handle that the right way because you can't build a long video on a claim you can't support. Those ideas are not confirmed, but they work as a psychological mirror. Because when humans face the unknown, we tend to fill the unknown with stories. Sometimes those stories are true, often they're not. But the impulse is real. And in the Voyager story, the unknown is large enough to swallow any story you feed it. So the smarter move is to keep your viewers in the tension without promising an answer you can't deliver. Here's how. You focus on what is genuinely eerie, even in plain science. A machine built before most of today's viewers were born is still responding from interstellar space. We are still decoding faint whispers through the Deep Space Network. The environment beyond the heliopause is real, structured, and not fully understood. And the mission is slowly dimming, which means every unusual behavior matters more because there is less time to learn. That alone is enough to keep people watching. Because it's a race, not a race against aliens, a race against silence. Now let's get practical, because viewers love what happens next, but we're not gonna tease it like a trailer. We're gonna explain it like a real news update. When a weird event happens on Voyager 2, the mission team does a few things in a very strict order. First, they confirm the spacecraft is still transmitting a carrier. Then they confirm lock and pointing. Then they compare telemetry with expected ranges. Then they check if any onboard fault protection was triggered. Then they see if the problem is temporary, repeating, or growing worse. Then they decide whether sending commands will help or make things worse. Because sending the wrong command at that distance isn't just an oops, it can be fatal. And in deep space missions, fatal often means silent. Now, there's one more layer that makes this story feel like a thriller, even when it's just engineering. Voyager 2 is not alone out there in the sense of environment. It's traveling through a sea of energetic particles, and that sea changes. Solar storms that happen near the sun can send waves of particles outward that eventually reach even the edge. Those waves can compress fields, change particle densities, and affect readings. So sometimes a weird signal is not local. It's a delayed consequence from home. That's another creepy truth. Even in interstellar space, the sun can still reach out and touch it through traveling disturbances. So the story becomes a mix of three worlds colliding. The old spacecraft world, the sun's influence, fading world. The true interstellar world. And Voyager 2 sits right where those worlds meet. That boundary is not just a line on a diagram. It's a region of tension. Which is why, when Voyager 2 does anything unexpected, it feels like the boundary itself is speaking back. Not with words, with behavior, with patterns, with changes you can measure but not immediately explain. Now here's where it gets really tense. Because the farther Voyager 2 goes, the less forgiving the universe becomes. Close to Earth, if a spacecraft has a problem, you can usually fix it fast. You can talk to it quickly. You can send many commands. You can test options. You can even send another mission later if you mess up. Out there, none of that is true. Out there, a single wrong move can turn a living spacecraft into a quiet piece of metal you'll never hear from again. So the people running Voyager 2 don't try things. They calculate, they double check, they argue, they simulate. They pick the smallest, safest step, then wait. Hours, sometimes days. And while they wait, the spacecraft keeps drifting through a place humans barely understand. That's why every unusual moment with Voyager 2 feels bigger than it should. Because it's not just a glitch, it's a glitch on the edge of our reach. Now let's talk about what the edge of our reach really means, in a way that hits the viewer. Voyager 2 is sending a signal so weak that by the time it gets to Earth, it's basically a whisper buried inside the noise of the universe. Imagine shouting across a continent, then someone trying to recognize your voice through thunder. That's the job. And the spacecraft is not sending this whisper with a brand new voice. It's sending it with a voice box built in the 1970s, running on fading power in a cold environment after decades of radiation exposure. So the real horror is not that something out there is hunting it. The real horror is that it's still alive at all. Now here's a detail that makes this story feel like a thriller without inventing anything. Voyager 2 is old enough that it was built with backups for its backups. But those backups aren't infinite. Some parts can never be replaced, never be repaired, and never be rebooted if they fail hard. So when you hear that engineers are turning off instruments to save power, you should hear what that really means. They're buying time. They're trading more years of contact for less science per year. And that trade is painful because every instrument that goes dark is a sense organ you never get back. Now, because your video title is about a final transmission, you need to make that phrase feel real, not melodramatic. So here's the honest way to frame it. Voyager 2's end will probably not be one dramatic last sentence. It will likely be a slow decay of clarity. First, fewer instruments, then weaker transmissions, then longer stretches of silence, then maybe a brief return, then silence again. And one day, no return at all. That's how deep space ends. Quietly. And the reason that hits people is because we humans are used to endings having a moment, a goodbye, a closing scene. Space doesn't do that. Space just stops answering. Now, let's keep building the mystery where it actually lives, in the environment. Beyond the heliopause, Voyager 2 is moving through the local interstellar medium. And that medium has structure. It's not uniform. It has variations in density, magnetic field direction, and particle energy. Think of it like weather, but not like rain and clouds, more like invisible currents. And when invisible currents change, instruments notice in ways that can look wrong if you expected a smooth, calm ocean. So the big question is not, did Voyager 2 meet something? The big question is, what kind of ocean is it really sailing through? Because if the interstellar medium has ripples, waves, or regions of different pressure, Voyager 2 might pass through zones that make its readings shift in patterns we haven't seen before. That's the kind of unknown that is still scary, because it reminds you how small our experience is. We've sampled a tiny slice of one galactic neighborhood, and we've done it with 2 old spacecraft. That's not a full map. That's 2 footprints in a desert. Now, there's another layer that makes viewers lean in. The idea of local versus distant. A lot of people assume anything Voyager sees must be out there. But some effects can come from the spacecraft itself. This is where it gets sneaky. If a component ages and starts producing a little electrical noise, that noise can look like a real phenomenon unless you're careful. If a sensor drifts slightly, its baseline changes. If a bit flips in memory, a reading can look corrupted. And because the craft is so far away, you can't just open it up and check. So mission teams do something that looks boring, but is actually detective work. They compare. They compare against older patterns. They compare against other instruments. They compare against predicted behavior. They compare against known cycles. They try to answer one brutal question. Is the universe changing, or is the spacecraft changing? And sometimes the answer is both, which is even worse, because it means the story gets messy. Now here's where you can make the video feel intense in a clean way. Because even if we never mention aliens, the Voyager story still points at something humans hate admitting. We don't control this. We can build a machine and send it into the dark, but the dark decides what it does to the machine. We are not the owners of the environment. We are guests, and guests don't get to make demands. Now, let's talk about the most chilling part of Voyager 2 that almost nobody thinks about. Time. Voyager 2 is not traveling in space the way your brain imagines. It's traveling in time too. Every second that passes out there is one less second we have to learn from it. And because the spacecraft is aging, the quality of what it can give us doesn't stay constant. It declines. So every month of normal operation is a win, and every odd event is a warning, because odd events tend to show up more often when systems are stressed. Low power is stress. Cold is stress. Radiation is stress. Age is stress. So when someone says Voyager 2 sent a strange signal, the grounded version of that idea is still strong. Voyager 2 is entering the phase where any strange behavior matters more than ever, because it could be a preview of a larger failure. Now, let's go back to the golden record for a second. Not as a fantasy object, but as a perfect emotional symbol. People like to imagine the record being noticed, because it makes the universe feel like a room with someone else inside it. But the record is really about us. It's us admitting, even back then, that the universe is big and quiet and that we might be alone for a long time. So we sent a hello anyway, not because we expected a reply, because it would have felt wrong not to. And now, decades later, Voyager 2 is still out there carrying that hello while its instruments slowly go quiet. So in a strange way, the spacecraft itself becomes the message. Not what it carries, what it is. A proof that humans tried. Now here's where the story gets darker in the most honest way. Voyager 2 is teaching us that deep space exploration is not just about rockets and bravery. It's about endurance. It's about building machines that can survive the long, boring stretch where nothing exciting happens, and then survive the sudden moments where something goes wrong. And the truth is, we haven't built many machines that can do that for decades. Voyager is rare, so when it finally goes silent, it won't just be the end of a mission. It will be the end of one of the last living links to the original age of outer planet exploration. Which means, for a lot of viewers, this isn't just a space story. It's a mortality story. Not human mortality, mission mortality. The kind of ending that reminds you that even our greatest achievements have a shelf life. And yet, while it still speaks, it is still doing the job. It is still telling us what the darkness feels like. And that makes every received whisper feel like a gift you don't waste. Because you never know which whisper is going to be the last one you ever hear. And that's the part most people don't get. Voyager 2 isn't sending a message the way a person sends a message. It's sending raw radio energy. And we're doing a lot of heavy lifting on Earth just to turn that energy back into meaning. By the time the signal reaches us, it's so faint that it's basically swimming in static. The reason we can still hear it is because of the deep space network. Those giant dishes spaced around the world that keep listening even when the signal is barely there. They don't just pick it up, they squeeze it out of the noise, like trying to hear one specific drop of water in a waterfall. And even after the network catches the signal, that isn't the end. That's the beginning. Because the signal has to be cleaned, decoded, checked for errors, and compared against what the spacecraft was supposed to be doing. That means engineers are not only listening for what Voyager 2 says, they're also listening for how it says it. Is the tone stable? Is it drifting? Is it weaker than expected? Is the timing normal? Are the bits landing cleanly or arriving scrambled? And this is where a mysterious signal can come from in the most boring but real way. If the spacecraft's oscillator drifts, the frequency can shift. If the antenna isn't pointed perfectly, the signal drops. If the background noise rises, the signal gets buried. If the spacecraft is switching modes, the data stream changes shape. If an instrument is turned off to save power, you lose that channel and the whole data picture changes. So from the outside, it looks like a plot twist. From the inside, it's a team trying to answer one painful question. Is this the universe or is this the machine? Now, let's talk about the machine like it's a character. Because at this point, it kind of is. Voyager 2 is old enough that it doesn't behave like modern spacecraft. Modern spacecraft have newer computers, smarter autonomy, more robust error handling, and better power margins. Voyager 2 is a tough survivor, but it's not a luxury model. It's an old workhorse. So mission teams have to treat it like a fragile elder. You don't push it hard. You don't change things quickly. You don't spam commands. You speak gently, and you wait. And the waiting is what makes this story so creepy. Because waiting is where your imagination gets loud. You send a command, you wait hours, you get a response, you try to interpret it. And during that time, Voyager 2 is still flying forward, still drifting through fields and particles and magnetic regions we can't see with our eyes. Now, there's a detail that doesn't sound exciting, but is the heart of the drama: pointing. Voyager 2's high-gain antenna is like a flashlight beam. It has to point at Earth very carefully. Even a small change can mean Earth is outside the beam, and then the signal that was already faint becomes basically invisible. That's why the mispointing event was so terrifying in the most real way. It proved that contact can vanish without the spacecraft being broken. It can vanish just because the beam moved. And that should change how your viewer hears the phrase final transmission. Final doesn't always mean destroyed. Final can mean we lost the angle. Final can mean we lost the lock. Final can mean the whisper got too quiet to separate from the universe. Now let's switch from communications to what Voyager 2 is actually telling us when it is working, because this is where you can keep people glued without needing any wild claims. Beyond the heliopause, the sun's protective bubble is weaker. Inside the bubble, the solar wind dominates, and the magnetic field structure is shaped by the sundae. Outside the bubble, the interstellar medium has its own magnetic field and particle environment. So Voyager 2 is basically sitting on a border between two worlds. And borders are rarely neat. They're messy, they shift, they ripple, they react to pressure. If the sun has a period of stronger solar activity, that can send disturbances outward that eventually reach the boundary. Think of it like waves traveling across a lake. The splash happens near the shore, but the ripples reach far. So sometimes a weird signature out there is actually an echo from something that happened back home a long time ago. That's another reason this story is unsettling. Cause and effect are separated by months and years. Now, you mentioned stable magnetic fields versus chaotic ones. And that's actually a great angle for long-form suspense, because it's a real scientific tension. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 didn't cross the boundary at the same place, and they didn't cross at the same time. So it's not shocking that they saw differences. In fact, that's exactly what scientists want to study. If the boundary behaved the same everywhere, that would be simple. But nature usually isn't that polite. So researchers look at what each spacecraft measured and ask, what does this tell us about the shape of the heliosphere, the pressure from the interstellar medium, and how magnetic fields drape around the boundary like fabric around a moving object? This is real space physics, and it gets deep fast. People at places like the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics think about these questions, because it's part of understanding the solar system's neighborhood in the Milky Way. Now here's a way to keep it relatable. Imagine you're inside a moving car, windows closed, music playing. That's the solar bubble. Now open the window a crack. Suddenly you hear the outside world, the wind, the road noise, distant sounds. That's interstellar space entering the picture. Voyager 2 is the crack in the window. It's letting the outside in, but only in small, hard to interpret signals. And because the signals are small, your brain naturally wants to turn them into a story. A hum becomes a voice. A pattern becomes a code. A glitch becomes a warning. But the real story is still strong without the fantasy. The real story is that we are trying to describe an invisible environment using instruments on a dying messenger. Now let's talk about that dying part again, because it's the constant pressure that makes every moment feel heavy. The spacecraft's power declines every year, so teams have to prioritize. They keep the most valuable measurements alive for as long as possible. That usually means focusing on the instruments that can still tell us about the interstellar environment, like magnetic field and plasma wave measurements, and shutting down the ones that cost too much power. That decision process is cold, but it's also respectful. It's mission triage, and it creates a new kind of suspense. Because even if Voyager 2 never has another weird event, the mission is still moving towards silence. It's like watching a lighthouse lamp slowly run out of fuel. The light still turns, still sweeps the sea, still does its job. But the beam gets weaker with time. Now, you can feel how this changes the stakes. If Voyager 2 sends a strange reading today, you might have only one chance to study that pattern. Because in a few years, you might not have enough instruments running to confirm it. You might not have enough power to do the troubleshooting. You might not even have enough signal strength to decode the details. So every year, the mission becomes more precious. Not because it's getting closer to aliens, because it's getting closer to quiet. Now, let's bring in one more layer that makes this story hit even harder without lying. The Voyagers are not just spacecraft. They're benchmarks. Everything we send into deep space today learns from them. The way we track spacecraft, the way we build fault protection, the way we design long-life systems, the way we plan for energy decline, the way we use radio science, all of that was shaped by missions like Voyager. And that's why Voyager 2 going silent will feel like losing a voice from another era. Not nostalgia, proof. Proof that humans can build something that outlives trends and politics and headlines and still does the job. Now, there's something else people don't like to hear, but it's true. Even if Voyager 2 survives for years more, it will never send us a clean, perfect picture of interstellar space. It will send hints. It will send partial truths. Because there's only one craft on one path with a limited set of instruments in a giant environment that changes over time. So the goal isn't certainty. The goal is better understanding than we had yesterday. And that's a great place to hold your viewer because it keeps the mood tense but honest. We are not watching a scripted movie. We are watching a real experiment in the wild. A fragile machine drifting in a place we've never directly studied before, sending whispers back through the deep space network while the power fades year by year. And if you really want the fear underneath it all, the fear that's actually real, it's this. We might never get another Voyager in our lifetime. Not another mission that lasts this long, goes this far, and becomes this quiet voice at the edge of everything we've touched. So every time that signal arrives, it's not just data. It's the universe giving us one more sentence before the conversation ends. And here's the part that makes this feel like a true deep space thriller, even when nobody is trying to sell you a fairy tale. Voyager 2 is not just far. Voyager 2 is late. Late in the sense that its entire design belongs to a different era of engineering. It was built when computers were tiny by today's standards, when storage was limited, when you had to be careful with every bit of memory and every watt of power. And that older style of design has a strange advantage. It's simple enough to survive. Modern systems can be powerful, but they can also be fragile in complex ways. Voyager 2 is like an old calculator that still works after falling downstairs, because it doesn't have 1,000 fancy layers waiting to crash. But even tough machines get tired. So the mission today is like keeping a very old ship afloat while it crosses the darkest part of the ocean with fewer and fewer crew members on board. That crew is power. Now, when you tell this story, you don't want viewers thinking Voyager 2 is out there with full capability, just casually collecting everything. No, Voyager 2 is on a strict budget, and that budget shrinks every year. So the team has to choose what it keeps alive and what it lets go. And that means the most valuable part of the mission now is also the most fragile part. The instruments, the ones that tell us what the interstellar medium feels like. Because once an instrument is powered down for good, it's like losing a sense. You don't just lose data, you lose your ability to confirm patterns. And deep space loves patterns. That's the thing. A lot of what we call mystery is simply pattern recognition. Your brain sees repeated behavior and asks why. So when Voyager 2's data looks unusual, scientists have to decide if it's a real pattern in nature or a dying pattern in hardware. Now, here is where the story becomes truly tense, because you can feel the pressure in the way the mission is run. A deep space team doesn't see one strange signal and go public with wild claims. What they do is quieter and sharper. They take that anomaly and they ask, is it one instrument or multiple instruments? Is it one moment or repeating over time? Does it match any known spacecraft mode changes? Does it match any known space weather events from the Sunday? Does it match what Voyager 1 saw in a similar situation? Does it match predicted behavior from heliosphere models? This is why the Voyager missions connect to broader science. It's not just a lonely craft floating in darkness. It's a data point that feeds into how we understand the heliosphere. And that heliosphere matters because it is the shield that surrounds our solar system. And once you say that out loud, you realize the true stakes. Voyager 2 isn't just telling us about far away. It's telling us about our boundary, the edge of our neighborhood. And if you don't understand your boundary, you don't fully understand what protects you. Now, this is where people start to bring up the weird idea that the heliopause is like a wall or a gate or a barrier. That's a dramatic metaphor, but the real picture is more unsettling. It's more like a moving shoreline. If you've ever stood at the beach and watched waves push up, then retreat, then push up again, you know what I mean. The boundary isn't a perfect line. It's a region. It reacts. It shifts. It changes with pressure from inside and outside. Inside pressure is the solar wind. Outside pressure is the interstellar medium. And Voyager 2 is traveling through the meeting zone between those two pressures. That's why weirdness isn't shocking. It's expected. But expected weirdness is still weird when you're the first person to ever measure it directly. Now, let's talk about the exact kind of sign signals that can feel eerie, because they sound like something alive even when they aren't. Plasma waves. Plasma is gas with charged particles. In space, a lot of stuff is plasma. Plasma can carry waves the way air carries sound. But it's not sound you hear with ears. It's a wave your instrument detects as changes in electric fields. A plasma wave instrument can pick up bursts, tones, and long stretches of faint oscillation. And if you're a viewer, the word hum makes you imagine a voice. In reality, it's more like space ringing, space vibrating, space responding to pressure and movement and magnetic structures. And it can be local, it can be regional, it can be caused by events that happened at the sun months earlier, arriving late like a delayed ripple. That is a beautiful, kind of creepy, because it means interstellar space isn't dead, it's active. Just not in a way your eyes can see. Now add the magnetometer. Magnetic fields are invisible roads for charged particles. They guide them, bend them, trap them, accelerate them. So when Voyager 2 measures changes in magnetic field direction or strength, it's basically feeling the shape of an invisible structure. And sometimes those structures are smoother than you'd expect or more twisted than you'd expect, depending on where you are. This is where comparisons matter. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are not twins walking side by side. They're like two hikers leaving a city through different exits. They will see different neighborhoods, different weather, different terrain. So differences in what they measure can be part of the story, not a problem in the story. And the viewer needs to feel that because it stops the narrative from collapsing into one strange reading equals one strange cause. In reality, space is layered. Now, let's address something your audience will absolutely think, even if they don't say it out loud. Why not just send a new mission? Why are we still relying on two probes from the 1970s? And the answer is uncomfortable. Because it's hard, because it's expensive, because deep space is slow, and because Voyager succeeded in a way that's almost unfair. It was launched at the perfect time for a rare planetary alignment. That grand tour window is a huge part of why the mission became legendary. So yes, we have other missions. Incredible missions. New Horizons flew past Pluto. NASA and ESA built instruments that can study the sun and space weather. We have powerful telescopes like James Webb and Hubble studying the cosmos. But none of those replace what Voyager 2 is doing right now. In-place measurement of interstellar space. It is literally a sensor sitting out there. And that's why you can feel the emotional tension building even if nothing dramatic happens. Because it's a one-of-a-kind situation. Now, let's talk about the scariest kind of mystery signal. The one that's both real and deeply unnerving. A signal that is not random noise. A signal that looks structured, but not understandable. That can happen when data is partially corrupted, but still contains repeating patterns. It can happen when the spacecraft is switching between modes. It can happen when an instrument is failing in a rhythmic way. It can happen when the receiver on Earth is getting only fragments cleanly. So people hear structured and they jump straight to message. But the grown-up version is this. Structured doesn't mean intelligent. Structured means consistent. And consistency can come from machines as easily as it can come from minds. Now, here's where you can let your video breathe into speculation without lying, because there's a safe and smart way to do it. You can say, there are scientific explanations we can test. There are engineering explanations we can test. And there are philosophical questions we can't answer yet. That's where ideas like Ronald Bracewell's probe concept get mentioned, sometimes not as evidence, but as a thought experiment. The idea that if a civilization wanted to observe quietly, it wouldn't announce itself with fireworks. It might simply listen. It might simply watch. That idea is interesting, but it is not a Voyager 2 fact. And if you treat it that way, as a mirror for the silence, not as a claim, it adds tension without breaking trust. Same with Arecibo legacy data and the history of listening. Not because Arecibo proved aliens, but because it symbolizes something humans keep doing, scanning the darkness and hoping it speaks back. Now, bring it back to the heart of the story again. Because viewers on long videos need you to keep returning to the core. The core is not what did Voyager meet? The core is how long can we keep this conversation going? Because the closer Voyager 2 gets to silence, the more every tiny anomaly feels like a warning. A drop in signal strength feels personal. A strange drift in frequency feels like a tremor. A pause in science data feels like a door closing. And here's the thing people don't realize. Even if Voyager 2 is perfectly healthy, there will come a day when Earth simply cannot hear it anymore, because the signal will be too weak. The spacecraft might still be out there, still running in some minimal mode, still alive in its own quiet way. But from our side, it will be gone. That is the scariest kind of ending. Not a crash, not an explosion, a fade, a voice that gets quieter until the universe swallows it. And when that happens, the golden record becomes even heavier as an idea. Because the record is not for us, it is for whoever might find it millions of years from now, in a place we will never go. Which means Voyager 2 is not only exploring space, it is performing the most human act imaginable. It is saying we were here into a darkness that may never answer. And the reason that should keep your viewer watching is simple. Because once you feel that, you start to wonder what else is out there. Not as a monster, but as a reality we haven't learned how to measure yet. So we keep listening, and Voyager 2 keeps whispering. For now, and here's the part that makes this feel like a true deep space thriller, even when nobody is trying to sell you a fairy tale. Voyager 2 is not just far. Voyager 2 is late. Late in the sense that its entire design belongs to a different era of engineering. It was built when computers were tiny by today's standards, when storage was limited, when you had to be careful with every bit of memory and every watt of power. And that older style of design has a strange advantage. It's simple enough to survive. Modern systems can be powerful, but they can also be fragile in complex ways. Voyager 2 is like an old calculator that still works after falling downstairs because it doesn't have 1,000 fancy layers waiting to crash. But even tough machines get tired. So the mission today is like keeping a very old ship afloat while it crosses the darkest part of the ocean, with fewer and fewer crew members on board. That crew is power. Now, when you tell this story, you don't want viewers thinking Voyager 2 is out there with full capability, just casually collecting everything. No, Voyager 2 is on a strict budget, and that budget shrinks every year. So the team has to choose what it keeps alive and what it lets go. And that means the most valuable part of the mission now is also the most fragile part. The instruments, the ones that tell us what the interstellar medium feels like, because once an instrument is powered down for good, it's like losing a sense. You don't just lose data, you lose your ability to confirm patterns. And deep space loves patterns. That's the thing. A lot of what we call mystery is simply pattern recognition. Your brain sees repeated behavior and asks why. So when Voyager 2's data looks unusual, scientists have to decide if it's a real pattern in nature or a dying pattern in hardware. Now, here is where the story becomes truly tense, because you can feel the pressure in the way the mission is run. A deep space team doesn't see one strange signal and go public with wild claims. What they do is quieter and sharper. They take that anomaly and they ask, is it one instrument or multiple instruments? Is it one moment or repeating over time? Does it match any known spacecraft mode changes? Does it match any known space weather events from the Sunday? Does it match what Voyager 1 saw in a similar situation? Does it match predicted behavior from heliosphere models? This is why the Voyager missions connect to broader science. It's not just a lonely craft floating in darkness. It's a data point that feeds into how we understand the heliosphere. And that heliosphere matters because it is the shield that surrounds our solar system. And once you say that out loud, you realize the true stakes. Voyager 2 isn't just telling us about far away. It's telling us about our boundary, the edge of our neighborhood. And if you don't understand your boundary, you don't fully understand what protects you. Now, this is where people start to bring up the weird idea that the heliopause is like a wall, or a gate, or a barrier. That's a dramatic metaphor. But the real picture is more unsettling. It's more like a moving shoreline. If you've ever stood at the beach and watched waves push up, then retreat, then push up again, you know what I mean. The boundary isn't a perfect line. It's a region. It reacts. It shifts. It changes with pressure from inside and outside. Inside pressure is the solar wind. Outside pressure is the interstellar medium. And Voyager 2 is traveling through the meeting zone between those two pressures. That's why weirdness isn't shocking. It's expected. But expected weirdness is still weird when you're the first person to ever measure it directly. Now, let's talk about the exact kind of science signals that can feel eerie because they sound like something alive even when they aren't. Plasma waves. Plasma is gas with charged particles. In space, a lot of stuff is plasma. Plasma can carry waves the way air carries sound, but it's not sound you hear with ears. It's a wave your instrument detects as changes in electric fields. A plasma wave instrument can pick up bursts, tones, and long stretches of faint oscillation. And if you're a viewer, the word hum makes you imagine a voice. In reality, it's more like space ringing, space vibrating, space responding to pressure and movement and magnetic structures. And it can be local, it can be regional, it can be caused by events that happened at the sun months earlier, arriving late, like a delayed ripple. That is a beautiful, kind of creepy, because it means interstellar space isn't dead, it's active, just not in a way your eyes can see. Now add the magnetometer. Magnetic fields are invisible roads for charged particles. They guide them, bend them, trap them, accelerate them. So when Voyager 2 measures changes in magnetic field direction or strength, it's basically feeling the shape of an invisible structure. And sometimes those structures are smoother than you'd expect, or more twisted than you'd expect, depending on where you are. This is where comparisons matter. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are not twins walking side by side. They're like two hikers leaving a city through different exits. They will see different neighborhoods, different weather, different terrain. So differences in what they measure can be part of the story, not a problem in the story. And the viewer needs to feel that because it stops the narrative from collapsing into one strange reading equals one strange cause. In reality, space is layered. Now, let's address something your audience will absolutely think, even if they don't say it out loud. Why not just send a new mission? Why are we still relying on two probes from the 1970s? And the answer is uncomfortable. Because it's hard, because it's expensive, because deep space is slow, and because Voyager succeeded in a way that's almost unfair. It was launched at the perfect time for rare planetary alignment. That Grand Tour window is a huge part of why the mission became legendary. So yes, we have other missions, incredible missions. New Horizons flew past Pluto. NASA and ESA built instruments that can study the sun and space weather. We have powerful telescopes like James Webb and Hubble studying the cosmos. But none of those replace what Voyager 2 is doing right now. In-place measurement of interstellar space. It is literally a sensor sitting out there. And that's why you can feel the emotional tension building even if nothing dramatic happened. Because it's a one-of-a-kind situation. Now, let's talk about the scariest kind of mystery signal, the one that's both real and deeply unnerving. A signal that is not random noise, a signal that looks structured but not understandable. That can happen when data is partially corrupted but still contains repeating patterns. It can happen when the spacecraft is switching between modes. It can happen when an instrument is failing in a rhythmic way. It can happen when the receiver on Earth is getting only fragments cleanly. So people hear structured, and they jump straight to message. But the grown-up version is this. Structured doesn't mean intelligent. Structured means consistent. And consistency can come from machines as easily as it can come from minds. Now, here's where you can let your video breathe into speculation without lying, because there's a safe and smart way to do it. You can say, there are scientific explanations we can test. There are engineering explanations we can test. And there are philosophical questions we can't answer yet. That's where ideas like Ronald Bracewell's probe concept get mentioned, sometimes not as evidence, but as a thought experiment. The idea that if a civilization wanted to observe quietly, it wouldn't announce itself with fireworks. It might simply listen. It might simply watch. That idea is interesting, but it is not a Voyager 2 fact. And if you treat it that way, as a mirror for the silence, not as a claim, it adds tension without breaking trust. Same with Arecibo legacy data and the history of listening. Not because Arecibo proved aliens, but because it symbolizes something humans keep doing, scanning the darkness and hoping it speaks back. Now, bring it back to the heart of the story again, because viewers on long videos need you to keep returning to the core. The core is not what did Voyager meet? The core is how long can we keep this conversation going? Because the closer Voyager 2 gets to silence, the more every tiny anomaly feels like a warning. A drop in signal strength feels personal. A strange drift in frequency feels like a tremor. A pause in science data feels like a door closing. And here's the thing people don't realize. Even if Voyager 2 is perfectly healthy, there will come a day when Earth simply cannot hear it anymore, because the signal will be too weak. The spacecraft might still be out there, still running in some minimal mode, still alive in its own quiet way. But from our side, it will be gone. That is the scariest kind of ending. Not a crash, not an explosion, a fade. A voice that gets quieter until the universe swallows it. And when that happens, the golden record becomes even heavier as an idea. Because the record is not for us. It is for whoever might find it millions of years from now, in a place we will never go. Which means Voyager 2 is not only exploring space, it is performing the most human act imaginable. It is saying, we were here into a darkness that may never answer. And the reason that should keep your viewer watching is simple. Because once you feel that, you start to wonder what else is out there. Not as a monster, but as a reality we haven't learned how to measure yet. So we keep listening, and Voyager 2 keeps whispering. For now, the night the team realized this might be the last clean science packet, it didn't feel like a movie. It felt like a room full of smart people getting very quiet. Because when you work Voyager 2, you learn to respect small changes. A tiny drop in signal strength, a tiny drift in frequency, a tiny delay where you expected a steady heartbeat. Out there, tiny is how big problems introduce themselves. At NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the screens didn't show a dramatic warning sign. They showed numbers. Weak ones, wobbly ones. The kind that make you lean closer, like your ears are trying to help your eyes. The Deep Space Network dish was locked in, listening so hard it was basically holding its breath. And in that listening window, the carrier tone was there, but thinner. Not gone, just tired. That's the moment nobody likes to say out loud, but everyone feels. The spacecraft is still alive, but the distance is winning. So the team did what they always do when the universe starts tightening the rope. They verified everything. They checked the pointing, they checked the timing, they checked the health telemetry, power level, temperatures, computer status, attitude control. The basics still came back like a stubborn old voice saying, I'm here, I'm still here. And then they pulled the science frames, magnetic field readings, plasma wave data, particle counts where available. Not pretty pictures, just the raw feeling of interstellar space translated into numbers. And for a moment, it looked normal. Normal for a place that has never been normal to a human mind. Then the pattern shifted, not like fireworks, more like a door quietly closing. The plasma wave tones changed in a way that hinted the local density wasn't staying steady. The magnetometer showed a slow, subtle rotation in the field direction, like the invisible river it was drifting through was bending around something. Not a thing you can point at, not a ship, just structure, real physical structure. A reminder that interstellar space is not empty. It's organized. It has pressure. It has flow. It has moods. And the worst part was this. The data wasn't screaming. It was whispering, which meant you couldn't waste the moment. Because when you're this far out, you don't get to say, can you repeat that? If the signal drops, you're done. So the team grabbed everything they could while the window was open. They ran the checks that keep you honest. They asked the boring questions that save you from embarrassing yourself later. Could this be receiver noise? Could this be a drift in the oscillator? Could this be a mode change Could it be a power-saving switch? Could it be a sensor baseline shift? And the answer, the honest answer, was the one that always makes deep space feel personal. It could be any of that, or it could be the environment, or it could be both. That's the cruelty of exploration at the edge. Your evidence is precious and incomplete at the same time. Then came the moment that hit like a punch. The signal dipped again. Not total silence, just a dip that pushed it closer to the line where the universe becomes louder than your spacecraft. And everybody in that room knew what that means. You can have a living spacecraft and still lose it. Not because it broke, because it became too quiet for Earth to hear. So they made the hardest kind of decision, the decision you only make when the math leaves you no pride. They chose to protect the link. They chose to keep the voice alive, even if it meant sacrificing a little more science. One more instrument, power down. One more trade. Less data, more time. And then, before the listening window ended, Voyager 2 sent one more clean set of frames. Not a grand goodbye, not a confession, just proof. Proof that it was still out there in the dark, still measuring a place beyond the sun's bubble, still doing the job it was never meant to do for this long. That was the real final transmission. Not a sentence, a fact. We reached the edge. We touched it. And for a while, it spoke back through a machine that should have died decades ago. So what does this confirm? Really, it confirms the thing people don't like hearing. The universe isn't waiting for us. It doesn't clap. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't care that Voyager 2 is legendary. It simply keeps moving. And if we want answers, we have to fight for them with patience, with math, with antennas, with discipline, and with machines brave enough to fade quietly while still trying. Voyager 2 didn't prove monsters. It proved something heavier. That the dark is real, the distance is real, the silence is real, and the only way humans push back is by building a voice that can survive long enough to whisper the truth. If you want to go even deeper, click the next video on your screen now.